Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everybody. My name is Preacher Moss, host of the SOS, the Shout Out Show. Hope you're off to a fabulous week. Hope you're off to a great start of the week. You know, it's Monday. We're trying to get to Friday again. I appreciate everybody that's sending kind words and regards regarding the show. Listen, brothers and sisters, this show is a little bit. It's a little bit of a reach. Some people might even say that's overreach, but I looked at a couple of things. You know, we're so close to the midterms elections. They're coming up next year. You know that. And I began to revisit some of the things that we saw in the prior elections. And even going all the way back to 2016, really beginning to understand a little bit more holistically what this thing is about fake news and deception. Now, I purposely am trying not to make this thing a normal conversation about deception and fake news. The reason is much like the virus, it now has different variants, if you will. It is now metastasized into different things. You know, to put it mildly, it's like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. One of the famous iterations they ever had in a conversation was Elmer Fudd was right there getting ready to shoot either a duck or a rabbit. And one said, it's rabbit season. The mother guy says, it's duck season, rabbit season, duck season, rabbit season, duck season. And then Bugs Bunny goes, rabbit season. And then Daffy Duck goes, duck season. And he goes, no, rabbit season, duck season. And as a child, I would watch that. And it was a little bit beyond my scope. As a child, you're watching, they become like, how did that just happen? How did that just happen? That even now, brothers and sisters, we're not living in a cartoon with Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, but somebody somewhere has taken that concept to make you yell, it's duck season when you want it to be rabbit season. And that, brothers and sisters, is the nature of fake news. I'm going to, if at all possible, take it back, and I'm going to give you guys some examples about how we got to this whole thing about the new level of deception and the new level of fake news. The fake news is so good now, brothers and sisters, we don't even talk about fake news anymore. It became a part of our everyday lingo, and now it's been played so much that it aligns, brothers and sisters, and they take the fake off it, and now you just think it's news. It started with me this morning. I have an iPhone, and what happened was they have this predictive typing on the iPhone. Like if I say as and I get to the S on the greeting, it'll say salamu, and I don't have to type, just says salamu, and it says alaikum, and I guess it's supposed to help me type better, but it really makes you kind of lazy mentally. I'm used to typing stuff out. So as an experiment, what I decided to do, I went to my settings and I cut off the predictive part. Hear what I'm saying? I cut off the predictive part where it couldn't predict the words I was going to use. And while I was typing, I went to the us, but instead of it predicting, it corrected the word it thought I was going to say. Didn't predict it, it corrected it. What does that mean, brothers and sisters? It means that the predictions are built upon our mistakes. It's not doing us a favor. It gets better at analyzing our mistakes, but it doesn't let ourselves, grow and say, oh, let me delete, and develop muscle memory for correcting our own language, our own grammar. This is really interesting, brothers and sisters, because as we started talking about fake news and deception, it's the little things like this that have gotten us to this point. It's the little things that we've taken for granted, giving away little aspects of things that we control in terms of language, in terms of nuance, finance, things like that. And we've opened ourselves up to this world where we are right here, right now in 2021, where we have arguments over vaccinations or not being vaccinated. And the conversation is just like duck season, rabbit season, but in the middle, you have people who would die. So today on the Shout Out Show, I'm going to rewind this thing about deception. I'm going to rewind this thing about fake news, and we're going to have a conversation. So I want to give a shout out, a shout out basically to everyone who's going to stick on this program. But I also want to give a shout out to Apple. Thank you, Apple, for opening up my eyes and realize that you were really, really intrusive in my life. I'm a grown man. I've been spelling stuff for years, but thank you so much for taking that little bit of thing, making me think you were doing me a favor, and you were not. You were analyzing my mistakes. And analyzing my mistakes, brothers and sisters, and telling her I'm just predicting, brothers and sisters, that is the beginning of the end. It's the Shout Out Show. Let's get it rolling. And we are back. All right, everybody, listen, let me go ahead and give a shout out to my Shout Out Show family right up front so I can get into the subject today. Who we got in the box today? I know who we have. Satana, who we got? We got Sister Ree. Shout out to Sister Ree. Thank you so much. Okay, well, we got Brother Altaf Rashid. Mr. 6 o'clock, straight up, straight down. Coming in for Toronto. This brother is a trooper. I think he's been on for at least 500 shows. Altaf, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you've been there for that many shows. And faithfully here at 6 o'clock on the East Coast, he tunes in. He gives us salam. Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother. Appreciate you. Our Canadian ambassador. Thank you very much. Next up, we got Sister Ree. What's going on? Hello to you, Sister Ree. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you. Derek and Juwan, thank you so much for joining our telecast. I have something for you. I'm going to check your mail. I took a picture of something. I'm going to send it to you today. I think you might like it. All right. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Next up, we got Mama Sam, better known as Mary Moss. That's her Christian name. True. Fake news now brings about dangerous believers and dangerous actions. All right, Mama Son, you on it today. Thank you so much. We're going to get into it. Next up, wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Eric. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate you, man. Your presence, your input, it just makes brother feel good, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show, the Shout Out Show. Next up, okay, Ree, you are welcome, my sister. You are welcome. Next up, we got Sister Satana. How you doing, Sister Satana? Sister Satana got a couple of days off. She's back in the saddle again, making sure this program works. Like I said, the program, without Sister Satana, I always break it down. Without Sister Satana, it could happen, but it's not going to happen well. It's going to be very incremental, and it's not going to be good increments. With Sister Satana, it's great because now you have a producing partner who looks at aspects of a show. Remember I said, looking at aspects of something. All right. So let's get to it. Forecasting for deception and fake news. Let me rewind some things for you, brothers and sisters. Not just in television and movies, but I'm talking about historical events going all the way back to the Civil War. And we can throw in a bunch of other events, World War I, World War II, all those type of things. I have a philosophy. This is my philosophy. That in terms of presentation perspective, you have two camps. One is nonfiction, one is fiction. One is nonfiction, one is fiction. Here's the deal, brothers and sisters. When you're dealing with something that is nonfiction, you don't have to ask permission to engage it. You know what it is. You're watching it real time. Your senses work towards that. In fact, it's a very natural process. We live nonfiction lives, right? Let's talk about fiction for a minute, though. Fiction is interesting because to engage in fiction, at some point in time, you have to give permission to be a part of it. You have to allow yourself to open up parameters and say, you know what, that could happen, or that works for this narrative. But in some regards, you have to give permission. What has happened over the last 10 years It's the people that create fiction, brothers and sisters. They stop asking for your permission. They frame fiction close enough, brothers and sisters, and at that gray area, they frame fiction close enough whereby you don't ask, is it real? Whereby you don't do investigations. We've talked about this before. In the United States, we are the United States of no investigation. We have now allowed powers that be to present things to us that are largely fiction, but they don't ask their permission. If you're going to tell me a fairy tale, you have to tell me a fairy tale. If you're going to tell me a yarn, you need to tell me a yarn, right? You need to say that this is what it is. This is not true. And when you say it's not true, I do now give you permission and access to tell your story, give your perspective, or give your narrative. We don't do that now. And people say, well, Preach, what are you saying? Because we got to an impasse, if you will, or a largesse, if you will, we got to a point, brothers and sisters, where people stopped asking permission so much that began to permeate parts of life. Imagine if you had a news organization that gave you fiction and didn't, hear me now, didn't ask your permission. You willingly gave it to them. We can say Fox, we can say MSNBC, we can talk about a whole lot of these things, but it's the reality that you have released something and you create a new subset of culture. And it's the absence of logic. When you do fake news, and I'll try and break this down. When you do fake news is part of a process. Like fake news doesn't come out of anywhere. There's a term called conspiracy theory. People put a lot of emphasis on conspiracy, don't really look at the whole aspect of theory. When you do conspiracy theory, brothers and sisters, folks are not just throwing something out and say, do you like it? Or is that true? Or what are the parameters, the thresholds of what you're about to believe? They're not talking about the parameters. They're talking about the elasticity of what you're supposed to believe. They're talking about the elasticity of how you think. Where you originally said no, and then you said, could happen. Well, and this is it. I'm going to give you a story, brothers and sisters. I hope my parents are watching. A junior year at Marquette University, I was going through summer school, and I was taking a course in microeconomics. Now, let me tell you something. I was failing that course probably from the second week. I just didn't get it. The guy was drawing graphs, and it made sense to him, and it made sense to other students. It didn't make sense to me. And I tried. I just didn't get it. By the end of the course, at the final, I literally have to get almost a 98 to pass this course. Well, newsflash, I didn't get to 98. I didn't get 88. I didn't get a 78. I didn't get a 68. I got a 58. Failing is 70. I got a 58. Now, what I'm about to say, I'm not proud of, brothers and sisters. Because all I knew was I could not tell Mama Miriam and Papa Cliff that I got a 58 in summer school. So I began this process, brothers and sisters. I began this process of reevaluating the whole value of microeconomics. And I based it against how it would affect me and affect me in a way where how would it benefit the African American community? This has nothing to do with the test I just failed. Work with me here. I stalked the professor, brothers and sisters. I stalked the professor. I finally got his office hours. The F was in the books. It was in the books. He said, how can I help you? And I said, I need to talk to you about that test. He said, well, you failed. I said, that's the problem. You think I failed, but I didn't fail. And certainly, brothers and sisters, I began a conversation about the test that literally removed the whole idea that there's a meritocracy to taking a test. You study, you study, you do homework, you do tests, you do paperwork to inshallah to be prepared for the test. I removed all of that. Brothers and sisters, and I talked to him about the meritocracy of the test to the point where I said, I didn't fail the test. I failed a test that failed me. Now, I'm not happy, brothers and sisters, but he went for it. And I caught that little glimmer in his eye, and I kept telling him that you produced a test that failed me. It didn't properly prepare me to deal with microeconomics for myself or my people. Now, like I said, I am not proud of this. Not at all. But as I look around these days, we have more and more conversations, brothers and sisters, about things going on in society, and they are devoid, just like I was talking to this microeconomics teacher, they are devoid of the fact that these things that have substance and meaning, they're built on merit. They're built on merit. Think of some of the people who are running for office who have never been in office before. Why? Because the conversation that they're having with their constituents or the people they want to represent is absent of merit. And the only way they get in these offices is having conversations about the people who actually do the job. We can talk about their merit because they have a track record. You can't talk about mine because I don't have any. My job is not to talk about my meritocracy and how I do my job and how I am vastly qualified, but to talk about how that person is not qualified. And the conversation cannot come back to me. Now you're beginning to get it. The deception and the fake news, brothers and sisters, have a lot to do with beginning, if you will, to have aspects of, I like to say, practices. It's like reconnaissance in the military. You go out in the jungle during war, you get all your information, you come back to the troops and say, this is what they're doing. Well, that's what fake news and deception did, brothers and sisters. It created a spot. I want to say not just a spot. It created a platform now whereby people can have conversations that are devoid of meritocracy, that are devoid of the facts that we would normally, brothers and sisters, demand to see. And even furthermore, let me throw this out here. It's fiction. People are bringing us fiction, and I want to say we ask. You can ask, is this fiction? But now these days they don't have to tell you. There's no courtesy in telling you that this is fiction or this is a lie. This is what it kind of looks like Bugs Bunny and Donald Duck. It is cartoonish. Our political system looks like this. But let me even go further. The thing that you have to understand in forecasting deception and looking at fake news is the nature of it. It's the nature of it. Now, I'm digressing a little bit, but I watched this documentary about the musician Kenny G. Now, I have fashioned myself to be a pretty Kenny G. He's the greatest, biggest selling instrumentalist in the world. You know, he could play a note for 24 or 25 minutes. In the jazz world, he was ridiculed. Thank you, Pat Metheny. He was ridiculed. He played, they called it safe sax and soft, smooth jazz and all of that. I mean, he created a whole genre with his music. And they were the jazz purists, brothers and sisters, and I consider myself a jazz purist. And when I heard Kenny G, I kind of shrieked because I'm like, wait a minute, there's something wrong. There's something borrowed, but it's not being acknowledged. And what I found, brothers and sisters, and this is the thing you have to know about deception and fake news. Just like Kenny G's music, sorry, Kenny G, the characteristic that it bore was that it could not have any connection, no continuity, no fluidity for the actual music it came from. He literally believed that he created a new type of music and didn't borrow from this music. Well, with fake news and deception, the thing that's important is it cannot borrow from that because that's nonfiction. It can't borrow from it. Therefore, brothers and sisters, they've created a space whereby you just don't ask questions anymore. In my assessment of what happened with COVID-19 in the United States, it was a situation that we had a wellspring of people who willingly looked the other way on fiction, who willingly said, this man is telling me the truth, despite all the amount of evidence. This man is telling me the truth. You know, this might be the best way to explain it. So if there's any kids in the room, leave. It's like jazz. One of the characteristics of jazz is that it's a conversation. Hear me now. Musical instruments in the round, you have a drum, a bass player, a piano player, a sax player, another horn player. But there's a conversation, there's an exchange of musical ideas in that space. Everybody has their place, but everybody has their individuality and the ability to contribute to the music. Kenny G's music didn't. Kenny G was the spotlight, and it was all his interpretation. You didn't hear anything from the drums or the bass. There were no solos. He didn't celebrate the individuality of the music around what he was playing. In the documentary, it said, you know, it's bad. It is what it is. But it said jazz is sort of like sex, and Kenny G's music was sort of like masturbation. So deception and fake news is like Kenny G music. Meaning that you have other players around, but they don't get to ask questions. You don't get to question your reality. Much the same as I talked about the iPhone, the smartphone. How smart is it if it's only regurgitating my mistakes and predicting on my mistakes? It's not correcting my mistakes. It's predicting my mistakes. And much the same as we talking about deception and fake news, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, it's built and predicated upon our mistakes. The Democrats may lose 2022, and I'm going to tell you why. But you can, because they tried to correct a faulty system that in its nature, it was meant to be faulty. It's not like they were repairing anything. It was broken. Anything you put into that system, energy, resources, it doesn't matter. It's a fake system. It's like a car. They tell you put tires on it and new upholstery. But if the engine, forget not running, if the engine didn't even end the car, what have you achieved? There, brothers and sisters, is where we come to the point. We now have a very, very serious situation because all these things are aligning. So conversations that we have on critical race theory, they're fiction. They're fiction. Nobody's asking permission to give you fiction. There's a rush now on voting rights. There's a rush now on abortion. There's a rush now on immigrants. Why do you think that is, brothers and sisters? Because people don't believe they need permissibility from people who are on the nonfiction side to actually stand up and say something. Look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a man who said, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I will, in essence, punish you in front of your constituents by running another person who will follow, is obedient to me. I run them in a race. It's happening down in Georgia right now. And people say, hey, what do you mean? What do you mean? I'm like, because the system, and here's the big part, the system in and of itself will eat itself. It will eat itself. It will cave in like a sinkhole because it's minus the surface or the infrastructure. Now, why is this important? Because we keep building on this faulty land, if you will. We keep building on this surface, not understanding that there's nothing under the surface. And for every person who doesn't cry wolf, they're castigated. Everyone who says the sky is falling when the sky is actually falling, they're castigated. Everyone who says, hey, man, this house is on fire, and the person comes out on fire and go, it's not on fire. That's where we are right now. If you start thinking about it even more so, fake news has been one of the devices that's been used throughout the history of politics, throughout the history of race. I predict, brothers and sisters, in 3 years, that we're going to have a case in front of the Supreme Court that's framed on, you guessed it, critical race theory. Something that is a theory, brothers and sisters, that never ever tested the elasticity of the human mind. It didn't have to, because you had laws. You had laws that you could look to. This was a non-fiction theory. And though we say race theory, it could have been anything. Critical Muslim theory, critical transgender theory, critical Native American theory, that it took on the merits, here's the word, took on the merits and the concerns of the people who were going through it. You know what word you don't have? Critical white race theory. You don't have critical oppression theory. You don't have critical wealthy theory. You don't have those things because they're very, very minute, but they're also built upon the fact that to admit to one part of it, you got to admit to all of it. To say I'm wealthy means that you have to talk and expand about how you got your wealth. And maybe you don't want to do that. If you say, hey, listen, I'm a law and order, what does law and order mean? You have to expand on what it means. And you got to expand beyond itself. You have to do the thing that jazz does, which is invite continuity. We have to look at the evolution of your argument. And these days, brothers and sisters, when we talk about fake news and deception, it's a hard stop. Nobody wants to talk about yesterday. Do you realize they talk about critical race theory and they don't even use the names of the people who put it together? Richard Delgado, Derek Brooks, people like that. They don't even talk about these people. And the reason I don't talk about these people, brothers and sisters, is because the argument has to be one-dimensional. It can't be inclusive. It can't be inclusive of these facts. And making it one-dimensional, guess it makes it one delusional, and it also makes it, here we go, one voice. So listen, I would, in a wrap-up type of way, I would encourage all of us to expand our view on things that we see. So if we're looking at the marketplace, or we want to do a startup, in business is nonfiction. You either make money or you don't make money, even though people lie about how much money they make. But in the end, you can look at a ledger. Even myself, brothers and sisters, I told that horrible story of tricking my microeconomic teacher from moving my grade from a 58 to a 70 based on the fact I gave him the worst faulty argument in the world, and he went for it. I talked to him about the merits of his test, not the merit of my poor studying and preparation, and he went for it. And the one thing I had to do in that conversation, guess what I had to do, brothers and sisters? I had to keep him from going back and looking at the answers I actually wrote on the test, because I would have ruined the hustle. So think about those things, brothers and sisters. When you see deception and fake news, don't see it as the person is lying. Don't look at it like that. Look at it as a very, very intricate system of how people are trying to deliver information to you. And understand that that system is developing complex. That the system in its framework looks to you to take things away from your purview. That things require merit. A conversation requires merit. You have to be able to talk about what you talk about. You have to be able to talk about things you know. You just can't talk about things you don't know. 10 years ago, somebody started talking about something they didn't know, and people were in the know. They go, man, that Negro crazy. That person crazy. But now, brothers and sisters, there are people who are getting elected on things they don't know. All right. Enough about deception. Let's go ahead and wrap up, Sister Satana. I want to give a shout out to my brother Wale and my salon Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, JT. Who else we got? JT, in fact, this started with JT talking about Kenny G this morning. Yes, good documentary. I would suggest everybody, if you have HBO Max, check out the documentary. Let's go ahead and wrap up. Let's get to the big wind-up. Let's get to our sponsors. We'll give a shout-out to BeFinanciallyIndependent.com. Again, that's www.BeFinanciallyIndependent.com. You can call 1-888-496-6845. Again, that's 1-888-496-6845. All right, now, if you're thinking about getting a quality Islamic graduate education at the graduate level or the doctorate level, you know who I'm shouting out? I'm shouting out Bayan Islamic Graduate School. Again, that's Bayan Islamic Graduate School with programs in Islamic studies, Islamic education. They have one of the best programs, the Masters of Divinity program, with a focus on Muslim chaplaincy. We got a lot of people that need that help at hospitals and prisons and colleges all across the United States. So check it out. If you're thinking about it, go to banonline.org. Again, that's banonline.org. And before we get out of here, we want to give a shout out to our newest sponsor, Convenient Urgent Care, in the city of Houston with 3 locations. Those locations will be Cypress, Pasadena, and Houston Parker Road. Listen, you guys have been great. And I know I gave you a lot of information, but just think about it. Think about what you give permission to. All right. It's the Shout Out Show. Inshallah, I'll see you tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Well, team, we've come to the end of yet another show. And I have to say I had a good time, and I hope that you had a good time as well. Listen, at this part of the show, we have no more show. I could literally sing a song saying we have no more show. However, to spare all of us that embarrassment and chaos, I'm just going to say, please join us tomorrow here on the Shout Out Show, Monday through Thursdays, and every first Saturday, we do our Saturday Spotlight. Here we are again, 5 to 5:30 on the Central Time. And of course, we're going to do our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock p.m. And of course, that would be 6 o'clock on the West Coast. So time for you to go, because it's time for me to go. I think I will do that song. Thank you for coming to the show. Thank you for coming to the show. That's all the lyrics I wrote. But you get the idea. See you tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum.